Coming up, a segment from KTWU, your source for public television. Afterwards, don't forget to visit ktwu.org to make a pledge to help make more local programming like this.
You've probably heard about Quantrill's raid and the destruction of Lawrence, but have you heard about the story of the Burnt District and Order 11? That's the subject of our first story.
Right. What are you guys doing here? What is going on?
I thought I had witnessed and felt the hardships and privations of Civil War and martial law before, but it was reserved for this, the last week in August 1863, to teach me and others how much the human body and mind can bear up under and still survive. The 30th of August, instead of being a Sabbath of rest, was to all a busy day of care and labor, preparing to obey the stern mandate and abandon the homes procured by many years of toil and labor.
In August of 1863, most of the residents of a three-county region in western Missouri were forced to abandon their homes and leave the area. This mass outmigration during the third year of the Civil War was the result of a directive from the Union Army known as Order Number 11.
Order Number 11 was a military order that was issued by General Thomas Ewing Jr. on August the 25th, 1863. And the order basically required that all citizens living in Jackson County, Cass County, Bates County, and just a small portion of Vernon County vacate within 15 days. About 30,000 people, families, vacated those three border counties in western Missouri. After the order was issued, squads of troops, Kansas Union troops, traveled throughout those three counties and basically began telling people that they had to leave the county. In many instances, families found out that they had to leave when a squad of Kansas troops arrived on their farm and told them that they had 15 days to leave.
Many in reality didn't receive that message until 15 minutes before they were told to gather their things and leave. So the culmination, of course, was that most of the population of the border area left, not by their own choice. They were forced out by the federal troops.
In many instances, as soon as the families had packed belongings that they had to carry out of the county, their homes and barns were set fire to. And there are numerous instances of families standing in their front yards watching as troops set fire to their homes and their property. Those three counties that were vacated later became known as the Burnt District.
Order Number 11 was the result of many years of conflict along the Kansas-Missouri border. But the last straw, so to speak, was Quantrill's raid on Lawrence, Kansas on August 21, 1863. Order Number 11 was intended to create a buffer between Kansas and Missouri that would prevent further raids across the border.
They poisoned wells, they killed animals, they burned fences, they burned haystacks, they burned barns, they burned homes, chicken coops. And anything they couldn't carry off themselves was supposed to be destroyed. It was supposed to be laid waste so the Confederates would have no place to get shelter, no place to feed their animals, no place to feed themselves.
During those 2 or 3 days, I saw much of the incidents and the fruits of Order Number 11. Before and behind was seen the long moving train of sorrowing exiles, and the further we proceeded, the greater became the moving column of wretched fugitives.
Because this happened 2 years after the war started, all the wagons and horses had since been requisitioned by the military or stolen by bushwhackers. So those people filled their belongings into knapsacks and began walking out of the county. It was incredible. The average temperature during that 15-day period hovered between 90 and 100 degrees.
The residents of western Missouri were subjected to hardships we can scarcely imagine, and it's important to note that these were U.S. citizens. Missouri never seceded from the Union.
There was an important Civil War historian, Albert Castel, who wrote an article focusing on Order Number 11, and here's how he characterized Order Number 11. Order Number 11 was the most drastic and repressive military measure directed against civilians by the Union Army during the Civil War. In fact, with the exception of the hysteria-motivated herding of Japanese Americans into concentration camps during World War II, it stands as the harshest treatment ever imposed on United States citizens under the plea of military necessity in our nation's history. It's a bloody time, a violent time, a time where, as Castel explains, the United States government really did harsh things to American citizens.
Order Number 11 was rescinded in December of 1863, so it was only in force for about 4 months. But by that time, the damage had already been done. Few of the refugees returned to western Missouri, and those that did found that everything they had worked and struggled for had been destroyed.
It was basically what we called the burnt district, because you could look for miles and miles in every direction, and we have many eyewitnesses say that, and see absolutely no sign of habitation, except possibly a chimney that had not burned during the war because it was made of brick or stones.
The chimneys were called Jennison's Tombstones after Jayhawker Charles Jennison, who led many raids into western Missouri. The chimneys were the inspiration for the Burnt District Monument that stands on the outskirts of Harrisonville, Missouri.
Mainly it's dedicated to the stories of the women and children who had to deal with what life was like on the border as civilians caught in the middle. Because during Order Number 11, most of the men were not around. The women had to get their children out.
Order Number 11 imposed terrible hardships on the people of western Missouri. But if they hadn't been forced to leave, the outcome could have been much worse.
The Kansas perception is that Order Number 11 is to drive Quantrell out of the area. Therefore, it's a good thing. But the second purpose of Order Number 11, when it was issued, was to keep Kansans, especially as might be led by Senator Lane, from invading Missouri.
And Jim Lane had come out very strongly with the idea of marshaling all the forces available, marching into Missouri, and just annihilating wherever they marched. That didn't happen, partly because of Order Number 11.
And so it was with almost all of us. We left our homes with the expectation that when we should return, if we ever did, they would be in ashes, and with many such was the case. And all, perhaps, will concur in saying that this was one of the dark pages in their life's history.